India has once again increased its defense budget allocation by 13% in 2023-24. India's increased defense spending has been continually growing for the last 10 years. In the year 2013, it was 2,845.97 billion Indian rupees and reached 5,935.38 billion Indian rupees in 2023-24, almost a 108% increase in past 10 years. Earlier, SIPRI reported in April 2022 that India is ranked number 3 in terms of the top 5 military spenders in the world. As per SIPRI, India is number 1. Top arms importer in the world, and it maintains that position from 2013-2021.1. India is in a race to build up, upgrade and modernize its conventional and nuclear force and develop advanced means of delivery systems including hypersonic missiles. It is building an offensive military posture, which is threatening its neighbouring countries like Pakistan and China. India wants to achieve its objectives through military means, and once again, in 2023, it increased its defense budget to buy new weapons, aircraft, warships and other military hardware. On February 1, 2023, India raised its defense budget to 5,935.38 billion Indian rupees, 72 United States dollars and 60 cents. Point 2. This is an increase of 13% from the year 2022-23 initial defense budget estimates of 5,251.66 billion Indian rupees. Indian experts argue that this year's double-digit growth of the Indian defense budget is a result of the recovery of the Indian economy after the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020-21, it contracted to 6.6% and then it increased to 8.7% in the following year. According to the Indian Economic Survey 2022-23, in real terms, the economy is expected to grow at 7% for the year ending March 2023. The chart below explains how India spends its defense budget. Every year a major chunk of Indian defense allocation goes for capital spending, for the procurement of new weapons and military modernization drive. All these spending heads reflect a steady increase in the past 7 years, with the highest increase in spending on defense services. India raises defense budget to $72.60 BLN amid tensions with China. Reuters, February 1, 2023. In the 2022-23 defense budget, out of 5,935.38 billion Indian rupees, 226.12 billion Indian rupees were allocated to the Ministry of Defense, Civil, 2,701.20 billion Indian rupees to Defense Services, Revenue, 1,626 billion Indian rupees for capital outlay on defense services and 1,382.05 billion Indian rupees on pensions. In the Ministry of Defense, Civil, major allocations were made to the Coast Guard Organization, 72 billion Indian rupees, Borders Road Development Board Secretariat, 41.7 billion Indian rupees, works executed by Border Roads Development Board, 60 billion Indian rupees, and other services. Point 4 concerning Border Road, the agency's capital budget has doubled on the last 2 years from 2,500 crore Indian rupees in fiscal 2021-22, as well as 43% increase over the allocation for fiscal 2022-23. Regarding defense services, revenue, the Indian Army will receive 1,826.5 billion Indian rupees, an increase of 10.77% from the 2022-2023 initial allocation of 1,648.98 billion Indian rupees. This allocation will mainly cover pay and allowances for the Army, transportation and other work. The Indian Navy will receive 322.84 billion Indian rupees, an increase of 27.07% from the 2022-2023 initial allocation of 254.06 billion Indian rupees. This allocation covers pay and allowances, transportation, repairs and refits and other expenditures. Similarly, the Indian Air Force will receive 443.46 billion Indian rupees, an increase of 35% from the 2022-2023 initial allocation of 328.73 billion Indian rupees. The ordnance factories would receive 4.27 billion Indian rupees and 104 Indian rupees and 14 paise were allocated for research and development. In the 2022-23 defense budget, Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman allocated 1,626 billion Indian rupees for defense capital outlays, around 6.7% increase from the 2022-23 initial allocation of 1,523.7 billion Indian rupees. This expenditure would include new weapons, aircraft, warships, drones, loitering munitions, small arms and light tanks, as well as upgrade existing tanks and armored personnel carriers and other military hardware. Point 6 According to Indian Defence Ministry, This increase is a reflection of the government's commitment towards sustainable augmentation in the area of modernization and infrastructure development of the defense services. Out of this 1,626 billion Indian rupees allocation of capital outlay on defense services, the Indian Army will get 372.42 billion Indian rupees, an increase of 16.33% from the 2022-23 initial allocation of 320.15 billion Indian rupees. The Army will spend this amount on its modernization drive, which includes purchasing new weapons systems, heavy and medium vehicles, aircraft and aero engines and other equipment for the Army. The Indian Navy will get 528.05 billion Indian rupees, an increase of 11% from the 2022-23 initial allocation of 475.91 billion Indian rupees. The Navy will spend this amount on its modernization drive. Similarly, Indian Air Force will get 571.37 billion Indian rupees, an increase of 2.8% from the 2022-23 initial allocation of 555.87 billion Indian rupees. The above highlighted Indian defense budget and its trends reflect that India is pursuing a constant drive to expand its military machine. Although in the current defense budget, the capital expenditures of the Indian Army have increased by 16.33% as compared to the Air Force and Navy, the Indian Air Force and Navy are already spending heavily on the purchase of new weapons and aircraft. Indian defense experts seek to justify this defense budget by citing their comparison with the Chinese defense budget of $293 billion for the year 2022, and Indian political figures have repeatedly argued for preparing for a two-front war with China and Pakistan. India is also engaged in a quest to catch up with other major powers. It has already demonstrated the development of emerging technologies like anti-satellite capability. It has already started research and development of next-generation hypersonic missiles. It is building a nuclear triad, and its offensive military preparedness is aimed against its neighbors. Over the past decades, India has concluded major defense deals with Russia, the US and Israel for procurement of the latest weapons system. It is also developing autonomous weapon systems and is investing in various categories of autonomous weapons. Earlier, in January 2021, India demonstrated its offensive swarm drone systems, with 75 drones, and it aims to reach up to 1,000 drone swarms, with an operational range of 40 to 45 kilometers inside the enemy territory with their kamikaze-style strike, suicide drones, as a part of its preparation for non-contact warfare. The Indian military expansion drive will hurt regional powers as it is going to generate further negative trends. This will aggravate their threat perceptions, which might end up over-investing in technological modernization while putting the other domains of security on hold. The massive Indian military buildup is also detrimental to deterrent stability in South Asia.